everyone. Welcome to the 155th episode of Debating Metal. I am your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host, Chris K. While this may be our 155th episode, it is also cause for celebration because this is our 4-year anniversary. We published our first episode on January 27th, 2020, and 4 years later, here we are. Chris, tell them what we're going to talk about tonight.
Kenneth, on this episode, we're going to be discussing what we believe to be the 10 most important bands in heavy metal history. We've each put together a list of 10 bands that we feel have influenced and shaped the metal scene. We're going to start at 10 and work our way up. We'll probably have some overlap, but these are our opinions, and of course, we'd love to hear yours in the comments.
So sit back, relax, turn it up to 11, and let the debate begin. Chris, that's been our motto since day one. Let the debate begin. I think we added turn it up to 11 a little bit later on, but
yeah, so somewhere along the way.
So, dude, it's 4 years, man. Amazing. I remember this almost like it was yesterday. You sitting in my office at my house, you and I face to face doing these episodes, and then just a mere 2 months later, the whole world just decides to go sideways.
And
now we can't sit and talk to each other. So we had to figure out how to do this not over the phone, but over the internet somehow via video messaging of some sort. We ended up doing it with Skype. That sounded like shit. And so we went there for a while with really funky sounding video and audio. And then we came across, we just kept banging our heads like, how do we get this to sound better? And I remember those days. It was just so weird. That was such a long time ago.
I don't remember. I kind of remember doing Skype, but I remember us moving over to like recording through, recording programs, sharing files, and then now we have even better ways to do it. So, but like, yeah, it was a learning process. I mean, we started this thing, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, like the world's messed up all of a sudden. But we made it work.
Yeah, I mean, it was so weird because we did about a month, almost 2 months worth, face to face with each other. You come into my house, and literally, sitting across the desk from each other, and then all of a sudden we couldn't, and we're like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And it wasn't like it was an uncommon thing. I mean, obviously everybody was doing stuff like that as far as video was concerned, and having those kinds of Skype conferences. Zoom, while it may have existed in its infancy, or maybe not, but it was not a household name at all at that time. It wasn't until the pandemic where Zoom became a household name. So, and I mean, it literally blew Skype out of the water. And so it's kind of sort of FaceTime, but since you were an Android user, we couldn't really do FaceTime. So
Yeah.
it was one of those things that, like, all right, what do we do? And we were unprepared to go that route, but we had to figure something out quick.
I think most people were unprepared for that time period.
There was a lot. Yeah, there was a lot of things everybody was unprepared for.
Yeah.
Like standing in line for an hour at Home Depot just to go buy glue or something.
I'm still unprepared for that.
But 4 years down the road, we have done, as this is our 155th episodes, and obviously, if you add up the numbers, it does not add up to a week for 4 years. But we've taken time off in between. We've taken 2 weeks to do an episode, or this past summer, we ended up really going light on the schedule because of a variety of different reasons, and so we're here at 155 now, and there's a lot of stuff that happened over the past 4 years. A lot of humor, a lot of laughing, a lot of seriousness in some cases. But what are some of your favorite episodes that we've done along the way?
Um, for me, like I really like doing the research on a lot of this stuff. So I really enjoyed the multi-part episodes that we did, like on grunge, new album. We did glam, where we kind of talked about the history of those. I really liked the first. I mean, I like the worst to first a lot, and I think the first one we did was AC/DC. Um, there's a lot of ground to cover with a band that has that many albums. So I enjoyed that one. Metallica. I know we've done a few others, so those are a lot of fun. Um, and then I would say I like the year ones that we've done, like 1997, and we did another year, 1991, I think.
We did 83, I think it was. We did
83,
um
91, and 97.
91, 97.
Yeah. So those have been a lot of fun too. Um, I enjoy doing greatest hits, but like for me, it's also like a lot of research, and the more research I do, the more I find bands and stuff that like I didn't know about before necessarily, and I enjoy them. And then the worst to first are kind of the same for me because I dedicate myself to listening to entire albums, to really discover if those are the best or the worst. So it's a lot of fun.
I like doing those episodes too. The worst at first. It's weird because some of our best, actually, our number one most downloaded episode is ACDC's Greatest Hits. Um, we've got over 23,000 downloads, I think, of our episodes, and ACDC accounts for 10%. ACDC's Greatest Hits accounts for 10% of that. That's insane to think about. First of all, they've got over 2,000, I think 2,300 downloads. And that's wild. Nothing anywhere comes close to it. I mean, there's not another episode that is near 1,000 downloads. And, to be honest, I mean, this is a small show. It's not, I mean, we're worldwide, but we don't have a giant audience, and that's okay. It's growing, but that to me, 2,000 downloads of that episode is pretty wild. And then at the same time, some of our worst episodes are the greatest hits in terms of least downloads. There's a big variety in terms
It
of the bands that
depends
we
on the
choose.
band, yeah.
Right. It depends on the band. I really, really enjoy doing those, and I know a lot of the feedback that I've gotten via email or direct messages via our social media accounts has been they really love the algorithm of which we choose the songs that go on to the greatest hits. So the whole, we pick a song off our list and that we like, and then we drop a song off our list that we don't, that we're willing to give up, and then we go across to each other's lists, pick and choose and stuff like that. And people really enjoy that. But I think part of the up and down about it is, one, I think they're tired of hearing about it. Two, I think they're kind of like, no, I don't necessarily like that band, so they don't really care about it as much. You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, people are going to listen to what they have time to listen to, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I think that is the difficulty about those worst to first, sometimes not worst to first. I'm sorry, greatest hits. Sometimes is, yeah. If you really don't like a band, you probably don't want to know about their
right?
greatest hits.
And what's
Uh,
yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, you don't necessarily want to hear. And the funny thing is, we've had a couple of really weird instances that have popped up. Um, like one, the Twisted Sister. I believe we did a Twisted Sister's greatest hits, and that um, got traction on social media from Twisted Sister. But
yeah,
another one that got a lot of traction on social media was um, Alter Bridge's greatest hits. It was actually promoted by the band on Facebook. So
true.
whoever's running their social media account really looks around for stuff that says Alter Bridge all over the internet, and they came across our episode, and so they promoted it. And I mean, we had 200 something downloads of that like in a week, and I'm like, oh wow, that's crazy, you know. And we say, I throw out these numbers. There's other, obviously there are other podcasts and other video casts and all YouTube channels that are blowing our numbers out of the water, make it look like we're neophytes. But I don't care, because the people that listen to us enjoy us. The people that don't listen to us don't know what they're missing, and eventually someone will catch on. Maybe we'll figure out a way to convert the person that gave us a bad review on iTunes, and maybe they think now we do know what we're talking about. I mean, neither one of us.
It doesn't matter.
Neither one of us claim to be industry insiders or experts, but at the same time, this is the music that we love, and this is the music that we care about. And I come from a place of, I had worked in the retail music industry, and and you worked at Target, and had not necessarily retail music industry, but you've dealt with people buying it, so you've seen trends, and
I mean, I used to stock shelves of
right, and
records,
this is the music we love, so we're going to pay attention to it. So that's what's, who cares what people think. So another one of my favorite episodes, and this will be the last one we talk about, is, it's funny because we can continue to bring it up through different stories that we read, on Blabbermouth or Loudwire or stuff like that. But artists living off their legacy, I think, was one of my favorite episodes, because the topic just keeps coming up over and over and over again. Where specifically we talk about Dave Evans from AC/DC, because the man goes on tour in South America playing a full-blown AC/DC set, and all he ever did was record 2 songs, I think.
I did like that episode. It was fun.
So, and of course, any episode that deals with Iron Maiden and Metallica, I'm really, really enjoy, except one, which is my least favorite episode that we've done. I think this is probably one of your least favorite episodes. It was the album cover history. The one and only that we did, and it was on Metallica, and I thought that was pretty freaking hilarious in retrospect.
Well, we had talked about doing it, like, and adding video to it, but, like, we just weren't really prepared at the time. And if we were ever going to, like, re-release it, we would definitely do a video version of it instead, so that people could see the album.
I mean, we spent an hour and a half literally describing all of Metallica's album covers.
So bad.
What was funny about, we're sitting there, I pulled out my whole collection, and you and I are just fiddling through it, because that was one of the episodes we did face to face, and we're just looking through the albums and talking about them and holding them up like we're showing it to somebody. There's no video.
Well, we didn't record that one, because I know we recorded, like, some of the early stuff.
No. The only one that we recorded was the first episode.
The very first episode. Okay.
Yeah. So it was, we sat there, and I put my phone to videotape us doing the first episode, and I looked at the footage. I'm like, this is boring, because it was just a single shot, and it's a whole, my office,
we weren't
mess
really
and shit.
set up for it. Yeah. I would say my least favorite was probably that one. Definitely that one. But also, in retrospect, doing musicians' deaths on the 3rd episode was probably not the best call.
No, it was just, and it wasn't a bad episode. It was just depressing. Two episodes in.
I mean, I wasn't in the best state of mind through the first 3 years of this. So
nice.
So, I mean, it's hit or miss. Like, I had some health problems that were kind of affecting my life, so that definitely affected my mood sometimes, and picking subjects for episodes. I picked things like musicians' deaths and odd album out, I think, was one of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff where it was kind of a negative sometimes, but I still think, like, those episodes were good. I just, like, we're 3 episodes in, we're like, let's talk about dead people.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best way to go about it.
Right.
But here we are. 155 episodes later, 4 years on, we're still doing this. I believe we have a lot of content to really to talk about. We're going to do uh, a lot of new episodes and stuff like that. And I believe we've got a lot of good ideas that have pretty much kind of rearrange themselves from some of the other topics that we've discussed. And you know, again, like you mentioned, the years, not the annuals, but the years. Call them annuals. The year in review is the annuals to me. But the years that we talk about, like 1991, 97, we're definitely going to go back into the 80s because, of course, that's a really popular period of time for metal, and talk about some of those years. And then um, we're going to do some more worst of firsts along the way, and that's it's something that we got to tread lightly because we don't want to do too many too many times. And we also have the subgenre things like we're going to do one on speed metal, we're going to do one on new metal. We're still talking about trying to do one on the true Norwegian black metal, but it's if you were depressed the first 3 years, just this one might just hang you. But
well, in order to do it and do it right, I got to listen to a lot of the music, and
God,
yeah, that can be when it's not your favorite genre, it can be a chore sometimes.
that's a daunting task because look, like I wasn't too big into melodic death metal, right? But we did a couple episodes that pertained on artists and bands that were specifically in that genre. I don't have a problem listening to that music whatsoever, but and it's because it's not depressing to me. But listening to true Norwegian black metal and mayhem, the early mayhem, it's kind of like, first of all, it's almost like straining your eyes to see something in the distance. You're straining your ears to hear that. What is that tone? What is that riff? Because it's hard to hear.
Yeah, I
And
mean, it's just I believe in doing things the right way and listening to the music for what it is and kind of discovering something about it and seeing it through others' perspective too. So, and what's so great about that is for me, I've actually found a lot of music that way. Stuff that I didn't think I liked before or didn't have the right response to the first time, and over time really gained some respect for. So who knows? I mean, I've started on the script a long time ago. I've pecked away at it here and there over time, but it's just never been like, especially last year when there was so much going on, it was really hard to get around to. So I'll have to kind of readdress it and just get it done, and let's get it out this year sometime.
sounds like a plan. That's awesome. All right, so let's get to the topic for tonight. And tonight's topic is the 10 most important bands in heavy metal history. Now, that's each of us, so it could be in a list of 12, 13, 14, 15. It's definitely not going to be 20 because I'm pretty sure we've got some crossover. And, who knows? So, last week I went first because I wanted to make sure that I got my choice in. So why don't you go ahead and go first in this week?
All right. And I feel pretty good about my list. Went over it a few times and it kind of narrowed down what I really felt. So my number 10 is Venom. Venom is one of the first extreme metal bands there ever was. It was a new concept at the time and inspired multiple genres of music, at least in metal. They weren't the first black metal band. Let's just be honest. But they inspired black metal. It's a whole genre that has took the one portion of the world by storm. It affected a lot of things that happened in that portion of the world for a good amount of time. And it's really interesting to see sometimes, like when you break it down, you think about like who was the band that really affected this genre of music. You sometimes go, well, they weren't really in that genre, but obviously the inspiration came from there. So Venom was an English band. formed in Newcastle in 1979. We've actually discussed them before. We did a head to head of two of Venom's albums. I want to say it was Welcome to Hell and Black Metal.
Yes. Yeah,
All
because
right.
we didn't do At War with Satan because that was their third album, and by then, it was like, yeah, black metal was a big influence, but Welcome to Hell was a huge album for them,
Yeah.
in their time period, in their genre. So it was, which one really was better. So
I mean, but that band has been a huge influence on thrash metal, extreme metal, and black metal. So I mean, when you really think about their widespread influence, like they're huge in the genre.
yeah, and that portion of the world that you're talking about, obviously, we're referencing Scandinavia for the most part. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't limit itself there, but that is the one area of the world that's got the biggest influence taken from Venom. And I mean, for what it's worth, at the time that Venom was popular, put it that way, I had not gotten into them right away. I ended up getting into them a little bit later when I call it the dark period of my high school years, because
I just
I
pictured you in an emo haircut, and I know that wasn't the case, but
oh,
it
it
does.
definitely wasn't the case.
No,
Emo stuff
no,
was
that was after
yeah,
my
yeah, that wasn't
generation.
part of my look, my time period. But would when I say the dark periods of my times in high school, it was because at the time I got into Venom, I got into Celtic Frost, I got into Slayer, I got into the really darker side of thrash and stuff like that. And oddly enough, I still had not gotten into Exodus, which is weird. Um,
And
and
you were occasionally going out into the forest and
yeah, a couple
doing
times.
photo shoots.
But so Venom, I liked their early stuff, and I thought it was pretty cool, but I wasn't into, I would say, that style of extreme thrash, speed metal, or something like that. I didn't really get into until about 86. Right about when Slayer's Rain and Blood came out. About that period of time, I was really, really getting into thrash metal because that's when the big four pretty much released an album each within a year's time span,
Mhm.
culminating with Anthrax. So, it was one of those where Venom, they were there and people talked about them. I hadn't gotten totally into them yet, but when I finally did, I mean, I enjoyed it. I liked a lot of their stuff. Um, I really, really enjoyed that song Manitou that ended up on the single. I ended up buying that on the 7 inch. And so to go along with what we're talking about here, um, so Venom's on my list too. I unfortunately didn't rank them 10 to 1, but I'll go along with the way, along how this is going, and I'll put them in that same 10 spot as yours because it's there are obviously other bands that are more important along the way, and so I'll go along with that as being my number 10 as well.
Okay.
It was just I kind of my mistake. I had it in chronological order, and I didn't really think about um, putting them in a specific 1 through 10 or 10 through 1 kind of order. So it works though, because I mean I can agree with the placement of this one.
Well, think about it along the way and try to put them in your best 1 through 10 order.
Okay. All right.
All
So
right.
go ahead and do your number 9.
All right. So, my number 9 is Death. Um, Death was an American metal band formed in 1983 by Chuck Schuldiner. There's a little bit of debate whether Possessed or Death was the first death metal band. I think it's kind of a moot argument, honestly, because they were around at the same time, hung around in the same circles. The fact is, though, that Death has a much more widespread influence than Possessed did. Um, and there's going to be a lot of people listening that aren't really super familiar with Death, but there's a difference in influence in the industry versus influence in circles of listeners, right? There's something we talk about, like where guitarists are musicians guitarists, right? Where if you ask any guitarist, they'll know who this guy is. But if you ask the average fan, you might not know who he is. I think a lot of that goes for the industry in general. There's a lot of people who, while they have their level of fame, are a bit overlooked, but they influenced a lot of the musicians that got into the genres. And I think Death is definitely one of those. Like they released 7 studio albums, um, you know, had quite a career. Was the first death metal band that had a video on MTV. They actually appeared on Beavis and Butthead. Um, and so the thing is about Death though that like you can talk to so many death metal musicians or people that got into extreme metal, and Chuck was a huge influence. And even now, like I would say, with a lot of the re-releases, Death's influence has grown even more. There's a lot of modern fans that are just discovering the band as well. So part of it for me, when I think about these 10 that are the most important in metal, is not just how many records they sold, but who they influenced and who, like the genres that followed, that built up. Like I said, Venom isn't like the biggest band ever, but at the same time, the amount of influence they had on the industry is what really determines this. And for me, Death is definitely up there.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm gonna put them in my number 9 spot too. But for me, it's there's a combination on this particular uh, level, put it that way. It's split to me. It's split between Possessed and Death because the debate will go on for as long as metal exists. Who was the first death metal band,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can sit there and say if we're gonna go by discography and chronology, then it's Possessed, right? But they both started at the same time. Possessed just happened to get their album out first, and yet they were a little bit different in that they were thrashy. They were much more thrashier than Death was, but they had uh that dark side, that evil side to their lyrics that was more along the lines of what death metal would become. So who technically coined death metal first, we'll never know for sure. So I put both of them because death, is still considered, for the style that that death played, to me is more along the lines of what death metal is compared to Possessed.
Yeah, much more technically proficient.
Right.
Stylistically, they're very different, but there's aspects that are very similar. So, yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, you can easily put both in there.
Yeah, I mean, Seven Churches came out before the first Death album. Okay, so we're gonna go along that route. But are we gonna sit there and say, no one at the time, no one was saying that Seven Churches was the first death metal album. No one, but it did have Randy Burns as the producer, who's the king of freaking death metal
Yeah,
in terms of production. But again, I'm not going to say one way or the other. I mean, if you're going to personally ask me, I'm probably leaning more towards Death, the band, because Chuck is just it's the damn name of the band. you know?
I think it's more than just that. Like, there's the actual level of influence. Like, I guarantee you, if you ask 10 people that are at a metal show, you'll probably get more of a response out of Death than you would have Possess. Taking nothing away from Possessed whatsoever, but I just think that the influence is more widespread.
Oh, I mean, I agree. I agree with in terms of influence, but I think the influence is different in a way as well. Because again, Possessed was more along the lines of the evil side lyrically,
Mm-hmm.
um, and because Death and Chuck became so technical, even Chuck himself kind of went away from the lyrical content he was that he originally started with, and went to a more thought provoking, introspective in terms of humanity kind
Yes.
of
Absolutely.
lyrical thing compared to, evil and Satan and the occult and all that stuff that Possess kind of went along with,
Yeah.
so there, so while death metal, the genre kind of geared itself more towards gore and the occult and Satanism and all that stuff. Death, the band, and the style of music that they played, much more proficient, much more progressive in a lot of ways, obviously. And, so you had to have better players playing that, or at least death, Chuck's style of death metal. And so it was, to me, completely different music and two different kind of styles, all under the same banner. So,
Yeah, I get that.
all right. So what do you got for number 8?
For number 8, I've got Motorhead. For me, Motorhead, obviously they don't always identify themselves as a metal band. Lemmy came out multiple times saying that they're just a rock and roll band. But there's a lot of influence in their sound that helped develop speed metal, thrash metal, and some of the stuff that would come out in extreme metal as well. I mean, Lemmy's harsh vocals, the speed at which the drums and really just the whole band would play, um, you know, the style of music, very heavy, a little bit bluesy, and so like a lot of bands will cite Motorhead as an influence. Again, this is a big factor in who are these important bands. I mean, the influence that Lemmy had and the longevity of his career, and not just in music itself, but Lemmy became such a public figure. I think people just enjoyed his style, like not just fashion or whatever, but like just the style in which this guy lived his life. Lemmy was one of those larger than life people, and his influence just transcended beyond music, even. So, I mean, as far as the music itself, though, go like I said, speed metal and thrash metal definitely come from a lot of what Motorhead developed, and I mean, big bands like Metallica, you know, covered entire sections of their music. How many tribute albums does Motorhead have? I mean, they're they're just one of the bands that just I think over time became bigger and bigger and bigger, even though most of the music that people knew was from the 70s and maybe early 80s.
I can see the point on that. The funny thing about Motorhead, I think one of the biggest influences that they put out there, and this is not a joke, but at the joke at the same time, is their production value, which directly between them and Venom directly influenced black metal. And black metal could sit there and say, no, we wanted to be different from everybody else, but you were just like Venom and Motorhead, and you sounded like shit. So, but they made it worse. It was like, how much worse can you get? Oh, listen to a black metal album, you'll understand. Um, but that was one thing that when I was younger turned me off to Motorhead was their bad sounding records. Um, so it took a long time for me to finally absorb what Motorhead was all about, and so I was very, very late to the concert when it came to that.
Gotcha.
um, but they're not my number 8. My number 8 is going to be Merciful Fate. Very similar in terms of the way you mentioned how um, Metallica was influenced by Motorhead. Metallica was also influenced by Merciful Fate. So much so that when Metallica went to record Ride the Lightning, they were actually, because they're both from, Lars and King Diamond are both from Denmark, or Merciful Fate, that they lent that Merciful Fate lent Metallica some equipment when they went to record at the recording studio in Denmark, because Metallica had lost a lot of their equipment. It got stolen from them, not in Europe, but I believe it was in America they lost it, and so Anthrax let them borrow it. So when they went to record some stuff, they had to borrow amps and guitars and stuff like that from people they knew. So they became quick friends with Merciful Fate, who had just come out with Melissa, which came out in '83, and they were
Mm-hmm.
coming out with what was the second album? Don't Break the Oath, the second album. So I think they were recording at the same time. So it was one of those weird things. So they were friends, yet Merciful Fate was a huge influence on on Metallica. But Merciful Fate, beyond the Metallica influence, they influenced a lot of things. Being from that part of the world, Scandinavia, um, they took the influences that started in 1980 with bands like Motorhead, bands like Venom, in that extreme side of the world, and they also saw bands like Hellhammer and Celtic Frost put together their music and their extremism, and now all of a sudden, they're getting all these kinds of influences. But at the same time, the new wave of British heavy metal was huge at that time, and so Merciful Fate, not being extreme on the vocals, although you can call King Diamond's vocals extreme, it's not extreme in terms of screaming and stuff like that. It's
Extremely falsetto.
yeah, the falsetto portion is what makes it extreme, if you want to put it that way. But they were very, very new wave of British heavy metal influenced. You could hear it. They're not such a, I guess they're not so thrashy, but yet they influence thrash tremendously. So all these bands, we use the word influence, but there's also an important part of it that a band like Merciful Fate, he wore corpse paint. So he was one of the early adopters of corpse paint, as was Celtic Frost and Tom G. Warrior, and even Martin Eric Ain put some corpse paint on from time to time. But King was the more famous one. I mean, the most famous is Kiss, but they don't call it corpse paint. We'll talk about that later. But King, was the one. He's out there. He's got the upside down cross as his microphone holder, and not the stand, because the stand, and he could take that little upside down bone cross that he has and use and walk around with it. So he was just himself by himself, was extreme. And so he was extremely important in the development and what other people saw and used later on in black metal and some extreme metal, and even some death metal, and even some of the melodic death metal that would come out later on too.
Okay. I can see that. I think it's a fair choice.
All right, so what do you got for number 7?
For number 7, I've got Pantera. Pantera, to me, definitely influenced all of the groove metal scene, which a lot of bands that were doing other things we've discussed before. Overkill's a good example. Overkill was very thrash and then adopted the groove sound to kind of survive a lot of what was going on as far as the changing music scene. A lot of bands did that. Adopted groove. Testament's another example of that. So, Pantera, there's been arguments that they weren't the first band to bring out the groove metal sound, but they're definitely the biggest. Dimebag Darrell alone has influenced how many guitarists out there to pick up a guitar and start playing?
3. That's my guess.
Just 3. A relatively short career because of unfortunate factors. We'll never get to see a true reunion of the band, but obviously they're back with 2 of the core original members of the band. Let's call it that, because we could talk about their first incarnation of Pantera for a little bit, not all day long.
The classic lineup,
but the classic lineup, yeah. Whether most people know Pantera from their origins from Cowboys from Hell on, not from the stuff before that. But yeah, I mean, just a massive shift in music caused by this band. Songs like Cowboys from Hell, Walk, Cemetery Gates, I'm Broken, 5 Minutes Alone, just massive hits that still, permeate the music scene. Um, you know, I want to say they were in a SpongeBob SquarePants movie, right? Or the episode of the show.
I
Like,
don't remember. I think so.
yeah, I remember that. And unfortunately, like I said, we'll never get to see a true reunion. Both of the Abbott, uh, uh, Vinny Abbott, Vinny Abbott, Vinny Paul Abbott, and Dimebag Daryl are no longer with us. So that is the unfortunate aspect of it. But I think it's one of those things like um, there wouldn't be that groove metal scene if Dimebag Daryl didn't have that influence on it. I really believe that. They not just influence groove metal, but new metal, metalcore, a lot of that stuff. Like I would say Pantera was never metalcore, but a lot of the stuff that they had influenced the metalcore scene. So, like again, one of those bands that doesn't necessarily fit into a genre, but you can see other bands go, wow, that's some really cool stuff. We're going to take it in a different direction and take the torch. So very cool, man. I absolutely love Pantera.
You know, while you're sitting there talking about Pantera, I realize, what do you get when you take 80s glam metal, mix it with 80s thrash metal? You get 90s Pantera, because that's what was the groove about it. You think about the melodicness of 80s glam metal, and you throw it in with the harshness of thrash, because even the harshness of thrash, like with early bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax, they all had a melodic side to them, and they all had this way of grooving that, when you combine it with the way 80s glam metal was, that's literally what Pantera is. I mean, and
Yeah.
and they themselves were an 80s glam band, as teenagers. So it only makes sense that they would take that same glammy groove that they had and just go harder with it. They stole an influence from X Order, and they ran with it, and they became, one of the biggest bands on the planet at the time. So I can see that, and I can see their influence. Obviously, you see their influence every day. However, they're not my number 7.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't have them on my list at all. And it's unfortunate, but there are, 7 other bands that I chose that I felt were more important to her. But
All right.
it's good that you brought them up. So number 7 to me, in this particular category, is going to be Slipknot. Um, and I know you're probably just like, you're slapping your forehead, you're shaking your eyes, and just saying, how the hell did you pick Slipknot? Well, think
No,
about.
I had them at number 11. They didn't make my list because I'll explain after you do yours.
Okay. So the reason I put them in there is because, when you think about what Slipknot is today compared to what they were in 1999 when they started, when they released their first album, um, you wouldn't think that back in 1999, first of all, that they would still be here today. But it was such chaos when they first started. Like, literally, 9 guys going nuts on the stage. The music is chaotic. The music is all over the place. You never would have thought they would have had that kind of influence on the scene. But when you think about where they're at 23 years or 24 years, almost 25 years later, and this is a question that you and I have talked about, and we've almost kind of tried to do an episode on it, but it's like, who else? The question is, who can lead the charge of today's heavy metal? Who today can be the headliner if Metallica were to go away and not do festivals anymore, and they were to go away and not do stadium tours, who is going to be the next wave of bands that can play stadiums by themselves and sell out? The next closest band is Slipknot, which is amazing to think about. You know, they're not festival, and it's a festival for what it's worth. You know, they're headlining a stadium. I don't think even Slipknot can go out and do a stadium tour the way Metallica does and sell out the way Metallica does. But you know, when it comes to a traveling festival and you put in some good bands underneath them, Slipknot can do it, and they've obviously proven that they can. You know, and their influence on the bands that came after them is just very evident. You know, between the different styles of combining all the things that they've combined with, you know, they combine thrash, they combine death, they combine new metal, they combine metalcore, they combine traditional heavy metal all into one accessible sound. Because that's the other thing too, is like, how is it that they're popular with that kind of style, but yet they're relatively accessible, especially nowadays, although they still try to pretend that they're extreme. So it's crazy how they become accessible. And that's why, you know, I put them at number 7.
And I get that to some degree. I just don't think they have the influence that you're saying. You talked about basically how much they were influenced by other bands. You said they took like all these things and kind of like, you know, brought them into their music. But I didn't hear you talking about all the bands they influenced, you know.
And
so
well, to kind of cut you off there real quick, it's hard for me to say who they influenced because I'm not big on today's metal scene. You know,
yeah.
these bands that are in the metalcore genre or the calculus core or or the algebra core. I don't know any of those fucking bands, you know, and it's hard to listen to some of those bands, but I
Yeah.
do know, and I've seen it in pictures. You've seen it in you know how some other bands are doing percussionists or DJs. They're doing more than 5 guys. They might have 6, they might have 7. You know, they're not necessarily doing masks or jumpsuits, but they're doing styles. Like right now there's a band out there called Sleep Token.
Mhm.
They're following in Ghost's footsteps by not showing their faces. Okay.
Yeah, they're influenced by Ghost, not Slipknot.
Yes. No, but who did it first? First it was Kiss. Then it was, you know, then it was
So
Crimson
Kiss is,
Glory.
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
we think
Yes.
about it. It goes a long way. Then it was Crimson Glory, and then Slipknot. When they first came out, no one knew who the 9 guys in Slipknot were because they had those masks on. Mushroom
Yeah.
Head did the same thing. So it goes down the line, right? But as it goes down the line, someone, you know, that like, let's just say because they're young, Sleep Token, their initial influence might not be Kiss all the way from 1974. It might be a Slipknot, or it might be a Ghost, or you know, they stole the idea from Ghost, but we're going to do this kind of mask. It's a mask. It's not a costume that hides everything like Papa Emeritus or
I
whatever
got
he
you.
calls
I
himself
just
now.
don't think Slipknot's music has influenced as many people. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm saying I don't think it's as influential.
Fair enough. That's your opinion. I
Yes,
don't
sir.
like it. I'm going to be mad at you now for the next 2 hours.
That's fine. That's pretty late. You know.
All right, number 6. What do we got? Oh well,
Uh,
you were going to say something else about Slipknot.
no, that's basically it. I mean,
Oh, okay.
just that's why they didn't quite make my list. I think they do have some, like, there's some aspects of what you're saying that are definitely correct. Like, but I don't also think they're the next one to carry the banner. I
See,
think I think another band will show. Like, whenever Metallica is done and hangs up their guitar straps. Let's just say that. Like, I think there will be another band by that time that will pick up the reins from there. I think it's just gonna be it. Like Slipknot's time is kind of past.
See, now here's the thing. This is where we're getting into the semantics of words, right? You continue to use uh, influence, where I dropped the influential part, and I'm talking about important. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm not worried. I'm
I
not,
don't think Slipknot's important.
but okay, and that's the thing. I disagree with the fact that you're saying that they're not the next headliners. They absolutely are right now. A band that can do stadiums where I don't even know anybody else on the horizon who's even remotely close to being able to do what Slipknot can do. That's the crazy thing about it, because Slipknot will sit there and say, okay, we're going to do Knotfest for this weekend, somewhere in California. It will
Mhm.
sell out, right? But who else could do that? And we're not talking about any of the classics. Anybody newer or as old as Slipknot?
Yeah, but
Godsmack can't
you're
do it.
you're you're also talking about it's not fest, right? Like they have more than themselves just playing.
Oh yeah,
So there's
yeah,
any
absolutely.
any festival is going to have more options of people to see. Like there are people that I guarantee you that go to Knotfest that don't care about seeing Slipknot. Whereas you have a band like, I mean, Metallica is obviously the biggest band in metal right now, right? So they don't rely on anybody else to sell out their shows.
Correct. And I
So
and I did mention that even Slipknot cannot do it at this stage. They've never
yes,
been able to just announce a show by themselves and sell out. No, I agree with that, but they're the next closest because they can hold a festival that is Slipknot related
I get
and
that, but
be
I'm
able to do that.
I'm just saying, like by the time that like going back to Metallica when they hang up their reins, it doesn't just automatically go, oh well, that then Slipknot can sell out a show. I think a band like Ghost sells out bigger than Slipknot sometimes. I
It's
could
a
be
that's a
wrong.
di- it's a different audience. I don't think Ghost gets the same heavy metal audience that a Slipknot or a Metallica get. Well, probably closer to Metallica, but not a Slipknot.
It's still a metal audience. It's not the same audience, but you could say that the same thing about an Overkill audience is not the same as a I don't know Judas Priest audience. It's not. It's not the same.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Regardless, let's move on to six.
All right, number six. What do you got for
uh,
number six?
for my number six, I've got Van Halen. And some people might say, "Oh, well, they're not really a metal band per se," but I would disagree that their influence is not felt on the metal community. Um, Van Halen, um, you know, that finger tapping that Eddie brought it to prominence. He wasn't the first to do it, sure, whatever. But when people first heard Eruption, their minds were blown. And how many people picked up a guitar because of it? Um, a lot of the style that was brought into what they did is metal, and they had the attitude of metal. Um, so definitely one of the most important bands in the genre. The front man, how many emulated David Lee Roth? Um, just a hard rock band with that kind of attitude that played metal licks, that played amazing solos. Um, definitely had a massive impact on the metal scene.
I can see your point there with that because of Eddie and how many people picked up a guitar because of Eddie, how many people picked up a guitar because of Dimebag,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, how many people have picked up a guitar because of Zach, uh, how many people have picked up a guitar because of Slash. Those are the kinds of people that have that kind of reach. Um, yes, I agree that they're very important to the genre, but I left them off my list uh, only because I was focusing my top 10 list, directly in metal and for metal, and there's
Yeah,
only, for all that, there's only one band on my list that um, may or may not have ever fallen into the metal category. We'll get to them later.
okay.
So, but I mean, I agree. I mean, Van Halen was very influential. It was very uh, um, important. But here's the thing: to me, when you look at Van Halen and its influence, Eddie Van Halen is the influence. The band itself
Yeah,
is
but Eddie never did solo stuff.
no, he never did. Neither did Alex.
Yeah, and maybe I should expound a little bit more upon like why I say that. So if I listen to, like you mentioned, um, some of the more rare subgenres of metal earlier, right? Like you talked about mathcore and that kind of stuff, right?
All that weird shit. Yeah.
Um, so a lot of the finger tapping techniques and stuff are essential for a lot of those genres of music because of the speed at which these guys play, etc. A lot of that stuff evolved from type of music that Eddie brought around, right? So for me, when I really thought about types of metal beyond just what I listen to, I look at the way these guys play and that there's a lot of influence from Eddie in there. And and then I thought about frontmen, specifically frontmen who influenced so many of these frontmen, right? And you can look at guys like Steven Tyler, and you can look at guys like Robert Plant, etc. Like where there is that really like strong DNA in a lot of these bands, but also like David Lee Roth was just one of those guys that like people emulate, and not just people that were in hard rock, but like metal singers that were in the 80s. So, I mean, for me it was more than that. So it was more about like what's in the DNA of metal and where did it come from. So, not just, and like I said, not just the main genres, but all of the tertiary genres and stuff like that too.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, it's a good point. I understand the point completely. I disagree about the David Lee Roth part, but we'll save that for another time. uh, David Lee Roth is starting to get annoying to me, so he's dropping.
No, I mean he's annoying as hell now,
He's
but
dropping
like
way down on my list.
you can't deny somebody's influential just because they're annoying.
Sure, I can. Watch me. All right. So you got Van Halen for number 6. All right. So my number 6, I have Korn. And I was listening to Korn today specifically. I said, you know what are these bands that were different, that were unique, that did something that
Can I actually cut in just briefly?
sure.
I would agree with them more than Slipknot.
Okay, I get you. That's why they're higher on my list.
Fair enough.
I mean, there's only one higher. I mean, I think maybe I should have put Slipknot more towards the end. And originally they were just my number 10, but then I realized, well, maybe just whatever, doesn't matter. Here we are. Number 6, Korn. So Korn, for me, when I started listening to him, I remember when Korn came out. I was in the retail music industry, and I got the promo. I brought it home. I listened to this, and I'm like, "What the hell is this?" I mean, it's very seldom that I could sit there and throw a CD on and say, "What the hell is this?" But it was so different, between producer Ross Robinson and how he recorded the song. I mean, crisp, clear sounding instruments, the bass just cutting through because um, Fieldy just played such a different style of bass. He played a funk style of bass, but he wasn't funky in terms of like Flea. He wasn't funky like Rob Trujillo was with Infectious Grooves, but he played that kind of slappy style bass. Then they're playing, the Monkey and I forgot and Head are playing these down tune. You're getting a C a baritone guitar and probably playing, even more down tuned, which is crazy to think about. And they're playing 7 strings, and it's just like, what is going on here? And then you've got the singer who's kind of just, very personal when it comes to his lyrics. And it's like, holy shit, what is this that's playing? I was blown away. Now, mind you, I wasn't greatly going, wow, this is amazing. But at the same time, I was like, what the hell is this? You know? And then their next album comes out, and it's just like, okay, they gained even more popularity. And then Adidas, the song Adidas that they had, All Day I Dream About Sex, which is the schoolyard slogan for the school brand of Adidas, or the shoe brand of Adidas. I was just like, this is pretty cool, and they're getting to say it out loud. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, so they start this style of music, and they're not, obviously when they formed, they weren't thinking, oh, we're going to go ahead and create a whole new genre of metal. They just did what they did because that's what they came together to do. Very similar to System of a Down. No one can play like them, and no one can be them.
Yeah,
So
but a lot of bands definitely found some influence in their sound. So I mean, I can definitely agree with that
right,
one.
so Korn, basically, as unique as they were in 1994, because they came out, they released their demo in 93. They were the pioneers of new metal. A lot of people were calling it the new wave of metal at that time. Not the new wave of American heavy metal, which would come out a few years later. Or not even a few. They were part of that scene too, but the new wave of American heavy metal was a lot harder. But they were, very similar to how the great influencers, like you mentioned over and over, they're not part of the genre, but they created the genre. They were part of new metal. They created new metal, but they weren't part. To me, they were the influencers to the new wave of American heavy metal.
Yeah.
Because they're credited as being one of the earliest ones of those bands. But when you sit there and say, okay, what's the new wave of American heavy metal to you or to me? It's Lamb of God, Shadows Fall, On Earth. Those are the bands that are part of the new wave of American heavy metal, not Korn. But Korn is new metal, and they even had their influence on bands like Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park and stuff like that. So it was just crazy. And then they hit mainstream, which made it even more nuts, because when they hit the mainstream, then it exploded. And then the whole scene exploded. And then Hot Topic exploded. and everybody's angst exploded. So then all of a sudden shit went sideways,
Oh
So
yeah.
that's my
I
number
mean,
6.
I didn't have them on my list, but I can definitely agree with them being on there. Like that's not definitely not a band I ever listened to, but definitely had experiences with them. Very popular in my youth. So
I mean, they were one of
um,
the earliest bands to combine genres on a tour. You're
yeah,
they're not going to play strictly with metal bands. They're bringing in hip hop bands. They're bringing in alternative metal bands or alternative rock bands, or they're bringing in ska bands, or they're bringing in college style bands.
yeah, they had a lot of crossover appeal,
And
and
that's why they blew up, because they were able to. And that's what to me, that's what the whole new metal scene was. It was such uh, an amalgamation of so many different things.
yeah,
That's why, like when people talk about, they throw Godsmack and Creed into that category. I'm like, you're fucking crazy. Godsmack was a straight up metal band. More so from the second album on than the first album, but they still had some good ones. And people throw Creed in there and all sorts of stuff. And they're like, you know what? No, Creed's not new metal. Sorry. I don't know what you're thinking, but they're not. But they got lumped in there because, they were, the voice of Scott Stapp and the heavy
I mean,
guitars.
let's be real. Like genres of music are only just to identify what can sell best.
Yeah.
It's because it's like if you lump these bands together, they may not sound the same, but they might appeal to the same audience. So, like, yeah, a lot of people that were listening to Korn were also listening to Creed back then.
No, that's true. I was. So
All right.
number five.
Number five. This is my other kind of controversial band that may not necessarily be metal, but my number five is Kiss. And the reason being is like their image, really. Kiss inspired so many people, you know, guitar wise, drum wise, bass wise, sleeping with women wise, you know, uh, like Kiss had the pyrotechnics, they had the stage show, the levitating drums, rockets, shooting from guitars, smoking guitars, spitting blood, fire breathing. They had shock rock. They had that um, you know, that image that people were like blown away by and wanted to be part of. They had the costumes, they had the characters, they had the leather, the spikes, all these things that the image was often scarier than the reality of everything, right? The music itself was more bluesy and rock. But they did branch into metal, but I don't think those were the years that were the most influential. It was more the early years. And a lot of that stuff, like you said earlier, it wasn't corpse paint, it was just makeup, but it's very similar to the corpse paint. That the image of Kiss scared, the parents at home. They, oh, what is my child listening to? And there was that attitude behind it, and there was the excitement that was there, that is just like, how many metal guys have we heard talk about their love of Kiss? And it's just like Ace Frehley. um his style of guitar playing isn't necessarily the most technically proficient, but he has a soul to the way he plays, and people picked up a guitar because of him. And I keep bringing that up, but that's what the soul of music is. You see something or hear something and you go, I want to do that, and I want to make it my own. And I think Kiss was one of those bands that, not just through their music, but like through their image, inspired so many musicians out there.
Oh, absolutely. Dimebag Darrell. He's got an Ace Frehley tattoo buried in a Kiss coffin. So
Yeah.
Ace was a huge influence. Kiss was a huge influence on Pantera, specifically Dime and Vinny. So Kiss is number 4 on my list. So we'll get to my number 5 after I expound on Kiss. That was the one that I mentioned earlier that was maybe not necessarily metal, but they touched upon metal. I'm sorry, but if you listen to Kiss in the 70s, if you see their shows, they're about as metal as it gets from 1975, 1976, 1977, because they were out there playing a hard rock show. They were playing. Their music was harder than Ted Nugent. Their music was harder than Boston. Their music was harder than Foreigner. Okay.
Okay, that's not tough
No,
to be harder than Ford.
no, but think about, but Foreigner wasn't doing I Want to Know What Love Is in 1975, 1976, 78. Hot Blooded was 1970, their big song in 1978. Okay.
Still not
No,
hard.
I get that, but Kiss is coming out with I Stole Your Love, Love Gun, Detroit Rock City. Those are hard songs. And I'm not talking about difficulty. They're hard songs. They're hard rock songs. But they, for 1976, 1975, 77, that is what heavy metal was. Really.
Yeah.
I mean, Judas Priest was not much harder, if at all, when you think about it. They got harder. I mean, the hardest that they got, didn't, they progressed, and it wasn't until Screaming for Vengeance in 1982 that it really, really exploded. Because anything that you listen to on British Steel, I put Detroit Rock City on that, up with that. I put Making Love from off of 1976 Rock and Roll Over up against any of that music. It's just as hard, if not harder.
Yeah.
So for what they are in at that time, yes, they were a rock and roll band. They were not necessarily taken seriously, but when you go to those shows, that shit was, that rocked, and yeah, so parents didn't like them, but from after 1978, all of a sudden all the parents liked them. So it was weird in that regards. But yes, you hit it on the head. Kiss is important because of what they brought to the table. The shows, I mean, everybody uses fire and pyrotechniques nowadays in their shows. It's almost like a given. Who did it first? Or
Yeah.
who were one of the first bands to do it? I mean, Kiss was one of the, if not the first band to do it on a regular basis. Okay. But it's funny because, when you think about it, if you watch any of the old videos, they very rarely used a lot of pyrotechnics. They had maybe one or two songs at most throughout the show that had any sort of, bombs going off. The whole centerfold to Alive 2 is, I don't want to use the word fake because the picture is absolutely 100% real, but that never happened during the show. They posed that shot. They literally, on sound check, they posed it and they said, let's blow up everything we got for this picture. And that's how the picture came about. But they didn't necessarily do that. Like they did opening song on a Love Gun tour was I Stole Your Love. So, it's as soon as they hit that hard hit, a flash pot would blow off. The same flash pot that blows off when Orange Cassidy gets introduced is the same shit that blows up on the side of Kiss's show. But it wasn't a big torch of, a big tower of flame. It came once at the end of the show. So it would progress because the stuff in the 80s and then into the 90s was a lot more extravagant than anything they did in the 70s. But it's a reputation that they built it up on. But nowadays, obviously, Metallica has pyrotechniques. Amon Amarth uses fucking torches like it's going out of style in their shows. Iron Maiden has blows up stuff all the time. For beginning and end of their show. Hardly anything in the middle except on Legacy to Beast. Bruce comes out with that flame torch during Flight of Icarus? I think it was, yeah. So it was just pretty wild, but everybody does it now. Why? Because of Kiss. The makeup back then, it was called kabuki style. Now it's called corpse paint. So they were the first ones to use it. I mean, Alice Cooper had a little bit of makeup. He still puts on the eye stuff now, but he didn't do what Gene Simmons did, and so they were the first ones to use the whole face white, with a pattern on it of some sort.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Kiss is hugely important into the entire metal genre. So you're going to number 4. So let me talk about my number 5 since we were talking about Kiss. They were my number 4. They were your number 5. My number 5 for me, and this is probably going to ruffle a lot of feathers out there because it may, again, not be necessarily metal, but Nirvana ushered in the era of grunge. And while it's not Metallica metal, it's probably harder than a lot of the shit that came out in the 80s. Specifically, things like Smells Like Teen Spirit or some of the punk influenced songs that were on Insecticide. Right? Was that what it was called? Incesticide, sorry. I was trying to be nice about it. But, to me, they killed pop hair metal, if you want to put it that way, glam metal, hair metal, um, and ushered in the era of grunge. But grunge, in and of itself, you've got bands like Soundgarden, you got bands like Alice in Chains. They are metal bands. Whatever you want to say, you know, Black Sabbath is a huge influence on Soundgarden. Um, Doom metal was a huge influence on the style of Soundgarden. Alice in Chains, they were a glam band until they changed, and very similar to how Pantera changed. Well, so did Alice in Chains, and they get it. They get this singer Lane Staley who's just absolutely hypnotic, and they became the band that they are today. So Nirvana ushered in that whole era, and so to me, they are extremely important to the scene because of what they did, good and bad. They're my
I
number
can
five.
see that. This is 10 most important metal bands. And while the other two that we were a little questionable still have a lot of metal in them. I don't see the metal in Nirvana, but I see the impact they had on metal for sure.
Well, I see the metal in songs like "Smells Like Teen Spirit." I see the metal in songs like "Aneurysm." Okay, um, I see it in the way that that Kurt Cobain plays his instrument. I mean, there's a lot of punk influence as well, but there's a combination of all of that. I mean, Kurt Cobain, huge Kiss fan. I mean, they
Yeah.
did "Do You Love Me" on a Kiss tribute album. Okay, the Melvins, are influenced by Kiss, huge Kiss fans. Okay, does it translate? The Melvins are a grunge band, but they are a grunge metal band. Do people necessarily lump them into a Metallica style metal? No. Okay, the problem that people have with Nirvana is that they crossed over and they killed hair metal. But they still, to me, there is a style of them that is metal in a way, shape, or form.
We'll just have to agree
To
to
disagree.
disagree on this one.
All right. What you got for number 4?
My number 4 is Judas Priest. Judas Priest, commonly known to have coined the term metal. One of those bands that is synonymous with the word metal. The leather look that so many bands adopted. Rob Halford is the metal god. I mean, why are they referred to as the metal gods if they aren't, one of the most important metal bands ever? British Steel being like one of their biggest albums that just brought people into the metal genre. Like you said, they didn't become extremely heavy until Screaming for Vengeance. But the blueprint of what metal would become, like if I think of any band that just defines like metal at any period of time from their origins to now, they are that band. Anything they put out is truly metal in that time period. So you look back in their origins, Rockarola and Sad Wings of Destiny, and you go to Stained Class, and you go on to the era of British Steel, and later Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, etc., like so on and so forth. Even Painkiller. All of those times they were never really following trends. They were just getting heavier and heavier and heavier with each album. There were a few missteps along the way.
Point of
People bring
entry.
up Point of Entry, Turbo, but
Point of
those were
entry.
things that they were trying different things, right? So like There were again a few missteps, but for the most part, if you look at their career, it's pretty uphill climb just towards heavier and heavier music. And they just weren't one of those bands that just followed trends. Like people, they influenced so many people. Um, Even this last year, they what did they get the participant trophy in
Oh,
the
the Rock and Roll Hall of
uh,
Fame.
Rock and Roll Hall of Shame?
The thank you for participating in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame trophy. Yeah, they had it was like an not an influencers thing. This it's the same award that Randy Rose got in for. It wasn't a full blown nomination. You know,
Yeah, like it was like we're gonna give you this because people keep pestering us about it.
that's basically
Um,
what it was.
but yeah, I mean, there who you can't deny the influence of this band. Just every step they've taken from the beginning of their career to now has been in the name of metal, and that's the best way I can put it.
So Judas Priest is my number 3,
Okay.
and so we'll talk about my number 4 afterwards again. Um, I agree with everything that you've just said. They absolutely, they are. We as fans, all of us around the world who are into heavy metal, who consider ourselves a rivet head, a headbanger, a metalhead, we all owe our fashion style to Rob Halford and KK Downing and Glenn Tipton, mostly Rob and his gay friends.
And Ian's like, I'm here too.
You know, who?
Ian.
Ian Hill. Hey, wait, I'm here in the back. But really, um, who would have thought that a guy going into an S&M shop, walking out the way he looks, is going to influence an entire genre and every subgenre after that? Okay, I mean that alone puts them in this list. I mean they could have sucked, but because they're the ones who created the damn fucking dress code, that's why they're there, and that's how important they are. They created the dress code, and that's
Yeah.
leather studs. I mean, Kiss wore spandex more than they wore leather. Okay,
They were more like superheroes in a way,
well, no, but yeah, in the spandex. But I mean,
Yeah.
they wore black, right? And yeah, Gene had leather on, but Gene wasn't wearing, leather gauntlets. Gene, the only thing that was really leather on him, and that was because just the way it worked out, was some of his shoulder pads and his gigantic fucking cod piece that he wears for his
Yeah,
problem.
but like you could probably get away with wearing what Judas Priest wore on occasion, like in certain things, right? But like you couldn't wear like what Kiss wore to the store or something,
No, you can't, not unless not unless,
Platform boots.
not unless it's Halloween, you know.
Yeah.
But so Judas Priest, absolutely, they created the dress code, and so that's enough of a reason by itself. But you know, we move on. Exactly what you said. They got harder and harder and harder with every progressive album in the '70s and into the '80s. Okay, literally culminating in 1990s Painkiller. Okay, so
Mhm.
Painkiller became the marker for what Judas Priest became. Okay, that was the absolute culmination of their heavy metalness, if you want to put it that way. So since that time, all the albums that they put out have pretty much been equal in terms of their sheer magnitude of metal. And I mean, Firepower probably being the next most potent album that they put on. That was the last one that was released until this one that's coming out next month, I think it is. So
Yeah.
Invincible Shield. Um, so uh, yeah,
March, I believe.
oh, in March. Okay, so you got a month and a half, 2 months. So it's absolutely super important to the whole genre of metal because of the dress code and because of how they progress in each one, and they live is beyond the dress, but they live for metal. I mean, everything, like you said, Rob Halford is called the metal god for a reason, and everyone literally, treats him that way because he's one, he's a genuinely nice guy, but two, because he lives it and breathes it every day. Check out his Instagram page. He lives and breathes uh, heavy metal, and then there's some other things you might not want to open up the picture on, but
I don't know what picture you're talking about.
oh man, there's lots of them, dude. Literally, but he's the epitome of the living, breathing metal god, and that's awesome. So they're my number three. My number, yeah, well, your number four. They were my number three. My number four was Kiss. So, and your number five was Kiss. So you're at number three. So what do you have for number three?
For number three, I've got Iron Maiden. So Iron Maiden, probably my favorite band. It teeters and shifts from time to time. But I always go back to Iron Maiden. I mean, they put out two of my favorite albums of all time. But more than for me, this was a huge, massive band. Stadiums in a time when that was really unheard of. Back to their humble beginnings, they played in clubs and smaller venues, and you had kids bringing cardboard guitars so they could air guitar along with the band. It was a arrival of a new scene, and obviously that would be the new wave of British heavy metal. And they were the forefront of that. It was a whole different experience with Iron Maiden than any other band. Just in the time from 1983 to 1989, I mean, they put out some of their most massive albums. I mean, you could include 82 in that with Number of the Beast, obviously, but that core lineup that they had from 83 to 89 is probably what most people consider the classic lineup. This is a band that basically after Bruce Dickinson left, diminished quite a bit, went down to pretty close to their origins where they were playing clubs and smaller venues once again, but had a massive resurgence in the 2000s that has really not gone away. I mean, they're one of the biggest metal bands still to this day. And the influence of everything that they've put out on not just, the scene with their character of Eddie, but musicians, fans, and just really set an example of what metal was through, that surprising experience that it was. And you lived through a lot more of it than I did, obviously. So I'm always interested to hear your take on Iron Maiden.
Man, when I got into Iron Maiden, it was during the Number of the Beast era, 1982, 1982, 83, right before Peace of Mind came out. All I remember hearing before I got Beast was all about Killers, and the album cover was just everywhere. Everybody I knew was into Killers. I don't think anybody knew at the time, until obviously Beast came out and Bruce Dickinson was a singer, knew that there was going to be a vocalist change. But living through Bruce Dickinson and seeing the videos played over and over again, when we see it now, it looks cheesy because you intersperse live concert footage, or not even concert footage, performance footage, with these black and white uh, what do you call that? Black and white. So between, I mean, I don't want to call them Native American movies. They're kind of like westerns, but some of them were war movies. You know, like for Trooper, it was a war movie. For Run to the Hills, it was a western style movie. Number of the Beast was conceptual performance thing with with a devil dancing in the background with other people. So those videos, as cheesy as they were back in 1982, that wasn't cheesy. Back in '83, that wasn't cheesy to us teenagers and the burgeoning metal scene that it was. So it was pretty interesting. And then the whole concept videos, in the studio footage for Flight of Icarus, mixed up with Nico dressed up in a cloak, hanging out in the cliffs of the Bahamas. So, you know, it was definitely different. It was definitely cool. And living through Iron Maiden, I mean, it was just to see them get more and more popular and just literally come out with banger after banger after banger of an album was pretty amazing. So oddly enough, though, for me, I did not include Iron Maiden on my 10 most important bands in metal history.
I'm shocked.
And I went back and forth with it because I started thinking, I'm like, well, why? Why am I going to leave them off? What is it about them that's not so important? I started thinking, were they the first at something? The biggest thing to me that they were first at was making a mascot.
That's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and
they had a brand. They had an image that was beyond just the band. Like it was something else.
Right, and I had them on my list at first, because it was almost like automatic for me. But then I started thinking, well, to me, Judas Priest is more important. Kiss was more important, and then I had Venom on there as more important. And obviously Possessed and Death, that whole unique phase. So it was one of those things, is like they didn't create a subgenre, or they weren't to me, they weren't the influences of a subgenre, such as a Korn or a Death or a Venom or a Motorhead, or a Pantera. So I was like, well, I mean, the biggest thing would be the mascot thing, and I thought, if everybody had a mascot, okay, but not everybody has a mascot. So it's a weird thing, but that's the reason why I left them off. So it's tough, Now, if you would have said this is the 10 most influential bands in metal history, it's different. There's a difference to me between importance and influence. And so that's why I left them off. But you're just at number 3. I've already done my 3.
What about the Soundhouse tapes?
What about the Soundhouse tapes?
I mean, that's one of the most important, if not, the one of the very beginnings of the new wave of British heavy metal. I mean, you're saying that they didn't influence a genre of music. Like, absolutely they did.
Well, I mean, Zaxxon was already around. Motorhead was already around.
Yeah, but Motorhead is not really new wave of British heavy metal.
But they were lumped into it. Def Leppard came around the same time. It's weird. Yes, I see your point, and I see the question based on the reaction that I gave.
Yeah.
But like, when we sit there and say, Korn pretty much were the first to do what was considered new metal, or Metallica was the first to what many people consider thrash metal, because their style of thrash is different than Slayer's style of thrash, right? Um, when you look at that, I don't see, like, to me, Iron Maiden was another in a group of bands that all came out at the same time and were part of that scene. I don't know. I totally see your point because of the Soundhouse tapes, but the Soundhouse tapes,
But
to
they were
me,
bigger than every single one of those bands. Like
yes, they are.
they were the ones that like if you define new wave of British heavy metal, you're probably going to see a picture of Iron Maiden.
Oh yeah, you'll definitely see a picture of Iron Man. They were bigger, but their style changed, and that's why they became as big as they became. It stayed within the metal genre. It wasn't like how Metallica changed from from thrash to heavy metal to alt punk, or alt rock in the '90s. Not like that. They didn't change. Iron Maiden changed from being this band that was uh, new wave of British heavy metal to a heavy metal band. When Bruce Dickinson joined that band, everything changed. The whole style
Yeah.
of the band changed completely. Whereas, you listen to Iron Maiden, you listen to Killers, that is a slight change, a little bit more progressive than your standard new wave of British heavy metal. But look, Def Leppard, consequently, new wave of British heavy metal band, bigger than everybody, bigger than Iron Maiden. Okay, not in England. They couldn't fucking sell out a club in England, but they were selling out, all over the place in the States, you know.
Yeah.
But, when you look at record sales, put it that way, Def Leppard, biggest new wave of British heavy metal band, period. Right. But they're
Okay.
completely different. Bands like Zaxxon, and whatever's close to that, I'm trying to think who else is in that same genre or same time period.
I mean the first bands would probably be
I mean, Zaxxon's one of the earlier when they came out. Their first album was in '79. You know,
yeah.
so
I mean Soundhouse
for
Tapes
anybody,
was 79 as well.
Soundhouse it was '79, but it was that was produced by themselves. They put out there, and it basically got them a record deal. Zaxxon had
Yeah.
a record deal, and
But as
that
we've discussed, first doesn't always mean that they were, the most
no, no,
influential.
I get that. I feel bad for leaving
Otherwise,
them
I
off.
could have found this.
True. No, I mean I feel bad for leaving them off. But again, it's like, to me, they didn't create the subgenre. They were part of the subgenre of the new wave of British heavy metal. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
hard to really, you know. I mean, you know, I love Iron Maiden. They're my number two band. you know, so uh, it's hard to sit there and try and justify negatively leaving them off when they are my number two favorite band of all time.
Well, I don't think it's negative. It's just wrong.
All right. What's your number two?
My number two is your favorite band of all time, Metallica. Metallica, obviously, massive band, the biggest metal band today. They, still tour to massive audiences. They just recently did a a tour. I mean, they're still doing the tour, right? Currently.
Um, yes, technically they're still in the middle of that tour. They're just on a break right now. It
Yeah.
starts up again in May, I think.
Gotcha. So like they did that along with, performances that were being played in theaters that people are going to see because they can't get into the shows. And then, like I mean they're really the biggest band in thrash, even though they're not really a thrash band anymore. Um, Metallica formed in 1981, put out their debut album in 1983, put out massive hit after massive hit. After that, do a Black Album, one of the biggest metal albums of all time. Survived kind of changing genres over time and even became bigger and bigger. And there's just the legend of Metallica at this point, right? You people that were not even alive at the time that mourn the death of their original bass guitar player Cliff Burton because he was such a massively influential bass guitar player. You know, they've had documentaries done about them. They've had, you know, just book after book. These guys are multimillionaires who have influenced the industry through other means, like through, you know, advancing technology related to music. Um, I mean, it's hard to describe just how many things they've done, and that's to me that's the number two. So obviously, like there's one that I think is more important, but um, you know, you can't diminish anything that Metallica has done.
Well, there will be plenty of people who will try. Metallica is my number two as well. Um,
Okay.
and pretty much for the same reasons that you're saying. I tried to think of what it is that Metallica has done that makes them so important, and you're talking about they come out in 1983. Nobody's playing that style of music. I mean, you got a guy who in California who knows how good they are and knows how what they're going to bring to the table and cannot sign them because he doesn't have the money. And so they go to New Jersey and they sign with a guy who doesn't have the money, but he's going to figure out a way to get the money, right? When it comes to Johnny Z and Megaforce. So
Mm-hmm.
they come out with this album and it changes everything. It changes the game as soon as it comes out. Now that we mention it, Raven is the other new wave of British heavy metal band that was popular at the time, but even they came out. Even they started around the same time as Maiden, but their first album came out later. So you have this band that starts in gets their first album in 1983, and all of a sudden, second album, because now they have a bass player who knows music theory. They changed the game again on their second album, and then they kind of have a blueprint now. The second, third album, and the fourth album goes along with that same blueprint. Is just better and better. So then in 1990 they said, we're going to change the game again. We're going to do something different. We've become as progressive as we could possibly become. Now we're just going to literally flip the script, and we're going to become, for lack of a better term, more groove oriented. We're going to have that Phil Rudd pocket groove, AC/DC pocket groove, and that was the Black Album. And we all know the results of that changing the game. Ended up 20 something million albums later. And then they decided, not that they wanted to purposely change the game again, but the game changed on them when grunge became popular, and then alternative metal became more and more popular. They're like, hold on a second, if we want to stay in this world, we need to do something different. I don't think they needed to change, but Load and Reload, it is what it is at that point.
I never felt like those albums were necessarily copying anybody or anything like that, but they certainly did fit that era more.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, they weren't copying because they weren't like the other the glam metal bands that said you have to write grunge music if you want to survive. Metallica never had that. Metallica was going to do what they wanted to do, but they were, when the Black Album came out, they started recording that in 1990. It took a full year. In 1990, grunge technically wasn't mainstream yet. It was there, but it wasn't mainstream yet. So they didn't flip the coin because they saw something coming. They flipped it because they just like, we've done everything we can up to this point. Sort of like how Slayer was all super speed metal and on Rain and Blood, and they said they flipped the script and they slowed it down for South of Heaven. Still heavy, but it was definitely not, it wasn't Angel of Death fast, or necrophobic fast. It was South of Heaven, slow, almost groovy when you think about it. So, but Metallica definitely said in 1996, 97, 95, 98, those years in that middle 90s, they said they tried something different. It was not thrash metal. It was not speed metal. It was nothing like that. There was definitely a groove to it. And I keep using that word because it is what it is. It wasn't groove metal like Pantera, but there was a certain vibe to it that was definitely more, groovy. So, when I'm looking at this list, I'm like, why are they so important? Look at everything they've done throughout their career. For what it's worth, everyone comes out and says they shouldn't have done the movie Some Kind of Monster. But guess what? Bands nowadays are going to therapy, trying to stay together, or at least trying to, keep their lives together. Not a lot of them are putting out 2-hour documentaries about it, but there has been some admission that they're in therapy, for lack of a better term. But the whole documentary about making albums and stuff like that, Aerosmith did it, Metallica did it, Metallica continues to do it. They're one of the few bands in this world that can afford to constantly have a camera around them. And it is what it is, but that is the style, the thing that is what they put out there and they portray out there, and for what it's worth, like you said, they have this amazing tour that's going on right now, bigger and better. I mean, there's nobody competing on that level with them right now. Iron Maiden, no, not in the middle. I mean, Iron Maiden is the closest. I mean, Iron Maiden is they can, outside of the United States, can go head to head with Metallica and pretty much be equal. Inside the United States, Iron Maiden can't touch Metallica. That's just the way it is. Okay. And I'm not saying it's because Metallica is better or anything like that, or because I'm a fan. It is the God's honest truth. Iron Maiden can't do what Metallica does in the United States. They can't do a stadium tour. Right now, the only, Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, Metallica. Think about it. Think about that. Ed Sheeran's pop. Taylor Swift is pop. Metallica. I mean, and there's going to be fans out there saying, "Oh, Metallica's pop too." Fuck, what? Shut the fuck up. Really? Okay. Enter Sandman. Yeah, you want to call it pop music? It's not fucking Taylor Swift, and it's not Ed Sheeran. Okay. People are singing along to fucking For Whom the Bell Tolls, Whiplash. People are going nuts when fucking Whiplash opens up the show. Okay. So don't give me that shit. That is, it's a completely different level. But guess what? They're doing it in a fucking stadium, just like Taylor Swift, and they're breaking Taylor Swift's records in some cases. And it's like Taylor Swift and Metallica were literally head to head all summer long. Who had more tickets sold? Who sold more, to this particular venue? Who sold it more to that venue? And Metallica was doing equal or better in most cases. There's not a single metal band on the planet that can do that. Iron Maiden be number 2. So let's get to number 1. Because I could go on all night about Metallica. You know that.
Yeah, I do know that. All right, so I think we all know who number 1 is going to be. It's obviously Hagar, Sean, Aronson, Shreve.
They released
SAS, one of the biggest albums of all time.
I have that on vinyl. I seriously do.
Sammy Hagar, Neil Sean. I think the bits played itself out. So number 1 obviously is Black Sabbath.
Absolutely, that's my number 1 as well.
I figured it would be, considering the rest of your list, but it would maybe have shocked me if somebody else was. And I think it's simply for the fact that you know, this band was the first band that really put out a sound that evolved into metal.
Nobody's here without Tony Iommi's tritone guitars.
Yeah, and the lyrical content of what they were putting out. Obviously Geezer, I think most people know, wrote the lyrics of the early Black Sabbath albums. Ozzy had that sound, and just the band as a whole. Bill Ward, his contributions to what they did for the first 6 albums. It's not really counting 7 and 8. But and even then, like after that, when Dio joined the band and kind of refreshed the sound and made it even more of a metal sound of what we know today as metal. Everything that Black Sabbath did, developed what we know as metal today. Even more so than Judas Priest, that we talked about earlier, that really just waves the banner for metal. Black Sabbath was never truly a metal band per se, but they were definitely the blueprint, the sound, the thematic elements, the lyrics, the attitude, the look of what would become metal. Yeah, I mean they're the forefront, they're the originators, they're the blueprint, and there's no other band that I think of that could be number one on this list.
Absolutely. I mean, the godfathers of heavy metal, period. You know, they created something that no one wanted to even attempt because of the way that they played. I did a little bit of research on it. Diabolus in Musica, the same name as the Slayer album. Okay. Latin for the devil's interval, the tritone chord phrasing that Tony Iommi uses on Black Sabbath is what, for pun intended, set the tone for what Black Sabbath and heavy metal would be going forward. The horror, the occult themes that they used. And even then, they were socially conscious. War Pigs.
Yeah, from the very beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, very socially conscious. War Pigs is as relevant today as it was in 1970. That's how amazing that song is. And right now, War Pigs has more of a crossover appeal, and more people know about that song nowadays than they did back then. The
Have you heard T-Pain's War Pigs cover?
Yeah, I've heard it. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. And it's that, again, just like I said, more people know about it today, and it's absolutely incredible how relevant and how popular a song is right now.
I mean, they just used it at a recent WWE pay-per-view. It's their really? Survivor Series theme song. Okay. Yeah.
So, Black Sabbath's influence and the importance of that band is obviously felt today, and it is without a doubt, without them, we're not here. I mean, if they weren't here and Led Zeppelin was the biggest band to come out at that time, we're not that heavy. Okay. Just put it that way. You have to wait for, Lemmy to get, a little bit more popular. Motorhead. But that's Black Sabbath for you. I mean, they literally laid the groundwork, the blueprint. But think about too, we talk about they were a blues band, right? Think about what their albums did. There was jazz in their albums. There was pop overtones. I mean, it didn't sound that way, but I mean, look at Changes. There's the song Changes is piano and Ozzy. That's it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's a good song. It's like a little love song. Okay. Maybe it's a breakup song.
But it has a somber quality to it too.
Exactly.
That fits with their music. So yeah, I mean they're not an explicitly metal band, but they like we said, like using the word blueprint is I think is the perfect way to say it. Like all of the elements that would become metal derive from what Black Sabbath was putting out.
No,
The
absolutely. And
attitude, image, etc. Yeah.
right. And the reason I bring it up is because, so many people want to sit there and say, well, that's not metal. This and that and the other thing is not metal. Dude, go listen to Changes. Go listen to some of the softer stuff that Black Sabbath put out. Okay. Go listen to some of the softer stuff that Metallica has put out. In the way that metal has always been rebellious and it is considered to be rebellious music, those types of things, a Fade to Black, a One, a Welcome Home, an Unforgiven, Nothing Else Matters, that is more metal in terms of it goes against the grain. To me, that's more metal than what these guys are saying. That's not metal. Okay, because they're going against the grain, because they have the balls to sit there and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
That to me is metal. Okay. Those guys who sit there and continuously do the same thing, they play the same chord, they play the same three notes over and over and over again at the same speed for an entire album. Anybody could do that. Spread your wings a little bit and show that you've got more to you than that. That's metal. That's being metal. So,
Indeed.
that's the way it is. All right, so we don't have a big four tonight because we've spoken for the past 2 hours, and this is our anniversary episode. So there is no big four tonight. After all that, how could a big four even top that? So we are at the end of our anniversary episode of Debating Metal, episode 155, 4 years on. It has been an absolute pleasure doing this almost every week for the past 4 years. And we're going to continue to do new episodes with new and exciting topics and hope that you, our listener, our ever-growing audience, will continue to come along for the ride with us to debate and talk about the music that we love so dearly. So remember, you can listen to us every week on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to see us grow and be more and more popular, tell your friends about us and have them like or subscribe as well. They won't be disappointed, that's for sure.
And don't forget you can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new show. So remember to tune in to the next episode where we'll spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya!